Wheel gets the grease, and those who came on time love it.
There we go. All right. Um, well, hi everyone. My name is Winks and I'm a board member for the National Home Funeral Alliance. I recognize a few names here in the participants list, see a few new faces. Um, Thank you to everyone who registered for today's webinar on backyard burials. Whether you're here with us today live or you are watching this recording in the future via technology, we just appreciate you all being a part of our community. One of the driving forces of the NHFA is informed decision making around death. This is especially true with our educational initiatives that we've been working on, such as this monthly webinar series. Some people think that the NHFA's mission is to convince folks to have a home funeral, but that is not the case. We want people to know that it's an option so that they and their communities can make an informed decision about whether or not a home funeral makes sense for them, right? Likewise, with disposition options, there are so many out there these days. It seems like there's new ones popping up all the time we hear about in the news. And there are even more factors that play into how you might decide between options. Sometimes due to factors like finances, privileges, location, culture, or religion, there isn't even a decision to be made. You have one option available to you. Sometimes there are very few limiting factors and you are choosing between 5 to 10 different options. Today, we're going to dig into one such option, which I'm personally very excited to learn more about. But we also want to emphasize that when it comes to how we care for our dead, oh, I'm sorry, I just see the chat. Is that better? Am I making the sound better with my adjusting my headphones there? No,
Yes,
oh
that's a
no.
little better.
Is
That's
it?
a little better, yeah, but it was still kind of garbly.
Oh no, I was rambling on. I didn't realize. I'm so sorry, everyone.
Okay.
Let me switch my microphone really fast.
Does
Okay,
anyone else notice that?
better?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with my computer microphone then.
I noticed it.
So hopefully I was somewhat able to make myself clear there, but all that to say is we want to emphasize that how we care for our dead does not involve a should, right? There's no shoulds or should nots. If this option isn't available to you or it doesn't feel right to you, that's okay. If it's something that works for you and that hearing about it lights you up, I'm stoked that you made it to this webinar. Either way, I think we're gonna have a really great time and we're gonna learn a lot. And with all that said, I'm gonna stop chattering and introduce our fabulous host, Elizabeth Fournier. Elizabeth began her career in 1990 in Portland, Oregon, where she was employed as the live-in night keeper, sleeping in a trailer in a Portland cemetery. 33 years later, she is a one-woman funeral service in the rural town of Boring, Oregon. Elizabeth owns and operates Cornerstone Funeral Services, where she is affectionately known as the Green Reaper for her green burial advocacy. She's also the manager of historic Columbian Cemetery, Portland's newest green burial choice, and author of the Green Burial Guidebook, Everything You Need to Plan an Affordable, Environmentally Friendly Burial. She serves on the advisory board of the Global Green Burial Alliance. She gave a TEDx talk called Going Green, the Last Act of Environmental Volunteerism, and People magazine honored her work by writing, quote, Elizabeth Fournier is doing her part to change the way Americans bury their dead. We are so honored to have you here, Elizabeth. So now without further ado, the floor is yours. And thank you so much again for being our speaker this month.
All right, Winks, thank you. Thank you for everything. And do tell me if I sound garbled or underwater. I'll tweak and adjust as well, because I know we're all living in this Zoom world. Jane gives me 2 thumbs up.
Sounds great.
Fantastic. All right, thank you. All right, so this will be a very nice conversation. I love, Winks, how you said that. This might not be for you. It might just be something you want to learn. fantastic. As a licensed funeral director, my job is to give all options. And in my great state of Oregon, we have all options available. Full body burial at sea, aqua cremation, we can natural organically reduce people, we can bury people in their yards, we can do all this stuff. So again, just want to shed some light and show you what this is about. I'm going to show you some pictures and show you what does this look like, what does it feel like, what preparations do I take in the funeral home to get there, how do people do this themselves, and then I definitely want to answer whatever questions you have as we go. So I'm going to get my photo out of here because you don't need to look at me talking. Look at my beautiful photos as we go, because I just picked some that I thought would really kind of illustrate what's going on. All right. So I've just found throughout the years, I am a huge fan of green burial and all things green because it's science's way of showing us its inherent environmental awesomeness. I mean, really, every component of it is pretty great. Green burials, they save the planet. They also save the green in the wallet. And it's caring for the dead with the least possible environmental impact. And people are really embracing the concept of being economical and environmental by making this choice. All right. Let's see if I can. Well, let's go on. Hey, there we go. Okay. So when we have a burial, a natural burial, you get this mound afterwards. That's going to be the soil because it looks a little bit different than a standard burial, right? And these bodies have this environmental resting place. They're not filled with any embalming chemicals. They're placed in the earth without vaults or any biodegradable or non-biodegradable casket or container. And that end goal of green burial is that nothing is used that doesn't help replenish the soil. That's a really big one. You want to give back. You want to go green by giving yourself green. And ultimately, it just completes with a very lovely looking grave space like this after the process happens. Okay, so I'm definitely not an expert. I am just an advocate, and I want to share with you what it looks like to offer this choice to families. And I have found throughout the years that a lot of the families I serve, they support renewable energy. They like to drive hybrid or electric cars. They eat healthy food. They promote sustainable agriculture. They bring the cloth bags to the grocery store. And I find that so many people who live a green lifestyle really want that to carry over into leaving the planet as green as possible. So it's really wonderful that green burial is something that can promote that, as well as one of the choices, which is the backyard burial. So in my great state of Oregon, can't say that enough. I just love this darn state. Backyard burial is legal in so many counties. And families seek me out a lot to help them with this because a lot of funeral homes won't do this. They say, it's got to be in a cemetery of authority. This really needs to be something that I know who's digging the space. I know who's watching out. I know it's in perpetuity, and it's something that our funeral home has used. I understand that. I think that we're scared of what we don't know. I think we worry a lot about what's going to happen to my license if all of a sudden I let somebody do this where it's legal and ethical, but I've never done it before. So it's just a matter of doing it and making it happen, and you go from there. So what I talk to families about is we have a really lengthy conversation and we discuss what they want to do, and then we'd make it happen. And I always call the local zoning and planning office of the county, and I run the property address by them to get the green light. And then we are 100% fine. Everything is fine. Everything will unfold as it goes. This photo right here is from a young woman who cancer had gotten a hold of her, and her sister decided to have some neighbors come. They dug a space on the private property. The sister gave me this beautiful natural fabric. You can see kind of it's a big butterfly and this beautiful wrap, and they wanted her bathed and wrapped and said, bring her back. So we drove back to the property at the chosen meeting time. They placed her on some plywood there with some nylon straps, talked, lowered her into the space. They brought up the nylon straps, brought up the plywood because they didn't want those to be in the grave because they're not natural. And they took turns with shovels and covered the grave space. And it was pretty darn miraculous and beautiful. Most of these burials are very simple. They really cut across the spectrum of race, age, social standing, neighborhood. Pretty amazing. All the different people who want to do this. Okay. So backyard burial, it encompasses burying a person on residential property. So this is property, land that is privately owned. Somewhere someone holds the deed. This person has to give permission. So this precludes any land that has been endorsed as an actual cemetery. Okay. So the laws definitely vary state by state, county to county, and this is normally accepted in a real rural setting. So there are only 5 states in the US that absolutely say bodies have to be buried in an established cemetery. So those 5 states: Arkansas, California, Indiana, Louisiana, Washington. Those are the 5 that say, you know, we really don't want this on private land. And strangely enough, Oregon is sandwiched between Oregon and California. Excuse me, Washington and California. You know where I was going with that. And Washington and California both have the natural organic reduction legalized. So you think, well, why don't we do this? But that's what they aren't into that. Washington now had a law passed that was a House bill that went through back in May, and they probably will get back to allowing somebody to have a natural burial on land if they've already had a loved one buried there. So it's baby steps, and it's fantastic. And it's nice just to give families all the options possible, because it is so hard when somebody dies. It's so hard. And people often think you can be cremated or you can go to the cemetery in the metal casket. There's so many other options. And I'm really happy to be able to tell families that live locally, if you've lived in the same place and you're doing your thing, you don't have to go down the street and buy a cemetery spot. You can do it right there in the yard. Okay. All right. So that's sort of what that would look like. That's 2x6s laid out over a space. There's some shovels back there where the hole is prepared. Someone will be lovingly placed onto those 2x4s. Some words will be spoken. There's some ropes that actually will lift up the individual, either the casket or the shroud. Those boards across will be moved. The person will get lowered into the ground. The soil will be replaced. The earth will cover them. And then it's all the natural foliage. And you see this a lot in natural cemeteries. And then also you see this a lot in people's yards. It's really just kind of what that looks like. So when I'm entrusted with a loved one at the parlor and the family is really interested in natural burial, a lot of times they want to view the person before the burial. So they might come into the chapel to do that. They might have a small service at their house. They might decide they want to actually see somebody at the gravesite, because most standard cemeteries don't allow an open casket or don't allow a shroud where you can have the face exposed or something. But if you're doing this in your yard, you can do whatever you want to do. Again, as long as it's legal and ethical. I can't say those 2 words enough, because it's a very important factor here. When people come into the parlor, one of the scents I like to use here, you can see right there, is the Queen of Hungary water. And it's from Kinkarako Green Products out of San Francisco. It's a handcrafted disinfectant. And it has a real old world smell of wildflowers, herbs, and would you believe it, Russian vodka. So it just is very nice. And it's a nice way just to take a little sponge or loofah and put it on the loved one. And they smell great. They're disinfected, and the family always seems pretty satisfied. So I appreciate that very much. I also like to cosmetize people as natural as possible. Okay, so I have a lot of unembalmed loved ones, and unembalmed tissue means that skin becomes rather dehydrated, and therefore it's really harder to apply makeup. People will sometimes say, oh, put this on, and this is the makeup so and so would wear. Well, you know, deceased skin is a lot different, and it also depends on if skin's cold, all of that. I won't get too graphic, because again, not everybody here is in the funeral world, not everybody wants all the ins and outs, so I just want to just brush lightly on those things. So I find that I like to create color with some seasonal fruits, and I use a base of a natural oil. And I can use raspberries just right out here in the parlor. I'm in a repurposed goat barn in Boring, Oregon, and there's some crops of food outside my windows. I can step outside and get some raspberries and mush them up on a plate and get my brush and get my oil. This is carrot oil because it smells so delicious. And I can blend that together, and it gives the person a really wonderful glow. Of course, you can't get too crazy with the raspberry because then they'll be bright red, but you know what I mean. Everything in moderation. Something else that's actually worked really well is A lot of times when I mix products, I like to use cocoa butter or Vaseline or macadamia and skin oil or something which is going to be nutritious to the skin. It's going to moisturize the skin and it's going to smell good. So that's a fun piece. Right here, the person had a real dull and ruddy complexion. So I used some vitamin E oil and some chili powder. And again, I blended it really lightly. I'm really transparent with families. I tell them often that I like to use natural products and are they okay with this? And after I massage somebody and I give them a real non-makeup natural glow, they're really happy with it. But again, I feel it's my job to be informative and say this is what I'm doing because I don't want somebody to hit the roof later saying, what do you mean you use chili powder for my mom's blush when, you know, Maybelline was just as good? But most families who are doing something natural in their yards, they're really wanting to do something natural and they're thrilled that something unique and natural happened. So good response. And I'm really glad because one never knows. We're all just a work in progress, aren't we? We all just figure it out as we go along. We really are here just to walk each other home. So one more piece on the cosmetics here. I'm not a makeup gal. So I'm just not a cosmetics girl. I don't really even wear makeup myself. So it's been fun to really study that science of natural beauty products. And I had a visitation a few months back, and this person was jaundiced. And I thought, oh goodness, we're going to go out to the yard, we're going to have a burial. But in the meantime, I want to do something about the skin tone. So what I found is I took some of this corn huskers lotion, I put it on a plate, I used a hair dryer, I heated it up for about 30 seconds. And then the lipstick that the family gave me, they gave me this old tube of lipstick that, you know, mama wore back in the day. And that's what they wanted to see her in. So it was pretty hard, but I was able to take a toothpick and mix it in with this Cornhuskers lotion. And when you know it, it actually looked smooth. It looked good and it pretty well matched the color. So pretty happy with that. So that was a really awesome day to make all this happen. Okay, I guess I have one more here. I never know. Whenever I put presentations together, I think, well, what would people want to see? So just to explain what this is right here, the cornstarch and the grapeseed oil and the turmeric, I was able to make that to be the correct mixture for, again, taking care of somebody who didn't have a really good skin color. I'm always trying to figure out what to do. And I knew the turmeric was going to be a little bit aromatic. And when they came in, they loved it. They said, oh my gosh, grandma always overdid the spices every time she cooked. This is perfect. So it's really nice when spirit guides and just makes it be whatever the heck it needs to be, because the worst thing that could possibly happen is I can make somebody's experience not be what they envision. Every family deserves to have it as best as possible. So it's super neat when that works out. Okay, so once the person is clean, bathed, moisturized, cosmetized, has some color going, what have you, we need to get them into their chariot. So this is a simple pine box. A lot of my families tend to choose a natural pine casket. They tend to use a shroud. They tend to use a sheet off of their bed. Now, sometimes they will buy a wicker casket, maybe made out of willow or made out of seagrass or bamboo. But most of my families aren't very elaborate here in the country. I have a Vietnam veteran who makes some simple pine caskets. I say that's great. Or I have some shrouds here. Kin Caraco from San Francisco. Love this woman, Esmeralda Kent. She does great stuff. I support her. Or somebody will bring a sheet from their bed. And I say, if you're going to bring a sheet, bring 2 queen size sheets. If it could be natural organic cotton, better. But hey, we work with what we can work with, right? Plus, it's somebody's yard. They can do what they want. If somebody wants someone embalmed in a metal casket, they want the diesel truck bringing them there, they want the concrete poured, they want a huge headstone, it's their yard. They really can do what the heck they want. But it's just, again, giving some guidance of how to make it green. And that's really what most people want to do. So with this casket here, the family had brought an Afghan, and that's what's laying down in the bottom. There's also some cotton batting in there, and just from some quilting, and it was soft and lovely and ready to receive the body. So, and a pillow. So pine caskets like this don't have the luxurious pillow and the linens and the linings and the satin and all that. It's just pretty plain. So families bring some natural things and they bring things that belong to the person, and even better. Oh, well, what do you know? Kin Caraco again. This is Esmeralda Kent's shroud, and this is a lovely shroud that has rose inside. Those little pocket linings there, this is a muslin cotton shroud, and those have rose petals, crushed rose petals in there. It smelled fit for a queen, and the family was really thrilled. But that's the close-up. That's the inner lining of the shroud. And I thought that was a really neat visual to see that it smelled as interesting as it looks. How about that? So a lot of times here in the parlor, we have people swing by and they say, hi, I'm driving my person on the way to the cemetery, or we were in the yard and we're acting as our own funeral director and we just need help with shrouding or something or other. And this happens. So here's a guy who brought his truck and he had his loved one in just wrapped in a gray blanket. So we went inside and got a sheet. We have a gurney. That's what a gurney looks like. And the wood is a shrouding board. We put the individual on that. We're going to now wrap them with some sheet, get them back in the vehicle, and on they go. So again, as long as it's ethical or legal, I don't really prefer the open bed truck to transport a loved one. But however, in Oregon, people can transport their loved one if that is what they want to do. It's sort of under their own guise. But you know, I think that if I was involved with this family as their funeral director, I would have said, let's look for a truck with a canopy. Let's look for something else, again, just to keep it maybe just feeling a little bit more as safe as possible. And also, I talked about this family acting as their own funeral director. There's only 9 states that say that you have to have a licensed funeral director. So there's only 9 that say the family fully cannot control the funeral. And those are Connecticut, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Louisiana, Michigan, Nebraska, New Jersey, New York. And those are the ones that say you need to have a funeral director involved in the final disposition of the loved one. Here in Oregon, families, if they want to act as their own funeral director, they need to obviously have a death certificate. They need to get someone to sign the death certificate. They need to file the death certificate with the county. They need to prepare and take care of body care. Are they going to drive the person directly to the crematory? Are they going to provide some sort of cooling technique until a burial or a visitation or whatever happens? There's a lot that goes into that. That's kind of drifting over into home funeral. And I won't go into that. I'll stay with backyard burial. But just in case you're wondering what the heck I was talking about, that the family is doing that, that's what that is. Here in Oregon, also many states, families can drive their own loved ones to the cemetery or the crematory. They even can have somebody die at the hospital and they can load them up and bring them home for a while. People can do a lot of things, again, legal, ethical, really big deal. Family rights for caretaking the deceased, they're out there. And I think the National Home Funeral Alliance does a fantastic job breaking this down and putting what states need refrigeration, what states need a funeral director, what states family cannot provide their own transportation. It's good to know because let's say you are driving somebody from Nebraska to Florida. What does that journey look like? You're passing into different states, different things are happening. Check it out. Know your rules. Very important. It's there, you know, there isn't embalming police or body police at the border before you come in, but it's just a matter of, it's something that, you know, again, we need to follow rules. Rules are really important. If you don't know the rules, call your local funeral home. If they don't know the rules, call another local funeral home. If they don't know the rules, I will happily help you find the rules. I don't know all of them. I'm learning as I go, but happy to help somebody figure that out and figure out where they're going. And this family actually is bringing this woman to the National Cemetery. And I'm really proud to tell you that the National Cemetery in Portland, Oregon, allows green burial. Would you know it? You know why? We kept calling and saying, so-and-so wants to go and they would like to have a green burial. Oh, not today? Okay. Hey, so-and-so. So you know what? They got tired of hearing about it. We now have green burial. Ask and you shall receive. So veterans and veterans dependents can have a natural burial at the National Cemetery. That is pretty all right. These are what shrouding boards look like. And when you see them up and close and personal, this is a delivery of shrouding boards to the parlor. So they're thin, but they're sturdy. They're made from pine. They don't have toxic glue or metal or hardware. There's nothing in there. They're just a simple board to help carry the loved one. The family chooses a shroud rather than a casket. So if you're wrapped in a sheet or something which doesn't have handles, this is what you're placed on. This is a shrouding board. This helps you get from point A to point B. This is somebody in a shroud on a shrouding board in the back of our hearse. Okay. Even though I'm somewhat of an alternative funeral home, I still provide options. If somebody wants a van, somebody wants a hearse, they got it. They can have whatever they want to do. We actually have somebody out here who does a horse-drawn wagon. That's pretty slow on the old country road. And there's always like the school bus or the cropping machine ahead of that really slows everything down, the slow moving everything. So it might be better if we have someone who can go up to speed, but hey, who am I to say? Whatever somebody wants is fantastic. So we also call this the casket coach. That's kind of a neat name. In the industry, they call the hearse coach, but I've heard people recently refer to this as a casket coach. Learn something new every day. Now, this is what I prefer when a family is coming to bring a casket. I prefer if they use a minivan or a Subaru type car with the back seats down, or a station wagon, a truck with the canopy, large sport utility vehicle. All these things work really fine. This is legal. I don't go for this. I'm very clear with families. In this case, luckily, they were dropping an empty casket off at the funeral home. But, you know, if this is what they wanted to do, they can be in charge of this. Again, it's legal. Is it ethical? Oh, I don't like it. I wouldn't do this with any of my loved ones. Also, we are in the age of TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, and you know, people are snapping pictures and putting this all over the place. And I would really worry so greatly about the loved one on top of the car. Now, this was an empty casket, which still could have been banged up, but people still do this sort of stuff. And again, my job is to direct, give choices, give options. I don't want to put up barriers for people, but I also want to tell them the reality of there might be a lot of weight on top of your car. All right. So I want to focus now on the burials, but in Oregon. And the reason why I say that is sometimes I will talk about backyard burial and somebody say, well, we can't do that in our state, or that's not how it works in our state. And I understand that. It's different in all states, but because I'm licensed in Oregon, because I actually bury people in their yards in Oregon, I just want to share my experience. And if you can use that to grow your experience, or if you have any of your experience you want to share, I would love to hear it. I talked about 2 weeks ago, the Global Green Burial Council. We had the advisor, we had a forum, and there was somebody talking about burials in Hawaii and Maui and land burials, and they were talking about some of the things. So again, it's always a mutual conversation. People can always learn. Always happy to hear it. So in our state, how the wording is when I share with families, I say that Oregon law states that you may establish your own private little cemetery if you own the property. And own the property means you aren't paying the mortgage. You actually own the property outright. It is your property. And it goes to say you can't be paying rent or something unless the person who has the deed says, yes, you can do this. That's a really big deal. The next law is you have to obtain written consent from the county or the city planning commission, or something like that. If the city or planning commission, you know, the governing body, the county, whatever it is, but all that is on the death certificate and on the burial permit. I merely type private land burial, and I just put the address in the state. So there you go. There's your written instrument. There's your report. That gets filed in the county. They're well aware. And you need to agree to maintain records of the burial. And what that means, and what I tell people is, all right, if you're going to have grandma buried out by the lavender, lilacs, or what have you, great. But you need to draw a map of the property. You need to put a little indication where grandma is in the property, because what if there's a bad storm that comes through or a bad snow and the lavender or lilacs are gone? And what if it changes hands? Or what if now the next generation of your family lives there and one day you go to sell it or someone needs to inspect it and you say, oh yeah, I remember there was a grandma in the family out there someplace. And, we don't really know what that is. So really being accurate in your records of where somebody is, super, super good idea. And then the fourth is you have to agree to disclose the burial if you sell the property. You need to say on the deed there, that in the title. However, I'm not really sure how sales go, not my forte, but you need to list that there are human remains buried on the property. Cremains, you don't have to do that. Human remains, you do need to do that. And I'm going to say in the year 2023, we are more hip. We are more open with our lifestyle and mind expansion that people might say, oh, okay. Where years back we had movies like Poltergeist and everything was this big taboo, scary thing. I don't think we're there anymore. I think we've morphed into many people bury their animals all over the place. So we've realized that it's not really a spooky, scary thing. It's actually comforting knowing somebody you love is right there. So a backyard burial is not to be taken lightly. Obviously, you need to think about it. What will the property mean in the future? Who's holding it? And those issues aside, you have to consider how are you going to feel about this down the road? Are you going to want this to happen? Are you going to be okay with this? Is this sort of a just because you want to save some money? Are you just deciding, yeah, I think I'll just do this because I don't like the cemetery down the road or I can't afford it right now? Choosing to do this obviously is a bigger deal than something like that. Okay. So let's talk about preparing the grave space on the private property. So the home burials, especially here in Oregon, they must meet certain environmental standards. And it's important to know this. There is surface water, and the surface water, there's ground drainage that enters other water sources like ponds and streams and wells, tributaries, things like that. And that area is not to be used for a burial. Okay. You need to be 150 feet away from a water supply. That's 100 feet away from a drilled well, 25 feet away from a power line, a couple more rules like that, but they're all clearly written by the county. And also another thing is at least 20 feet back from the setback of your property. You might have 40 acres and you might decide you're going to go way, way back in the corner and do this, but right on the other side of the fence is a house, is a family, is something. Now it's fine. It's not going to contaminate soil. It's not going to be an issue. But it's just that idea of there is a family right there. They're not choosing to have somebody buried right outside their kitchen window. So it's just the thoughtfulness of realizing this is something you're doing. It's a little bit, it's what we did back in the day, but definitely alternative now. So again, just being considerate of others too. A family burial ground on your own land is great. You can name it. You can make an Instagram page for it, whatever you want to do, but you can't charge money for the burial sites. Then you get into, now you're going to have a cemetery of authority. You have to have your local cemetery bureau license you. That gets into a whole other thing about how you handle the money, because it's federal trade, how that gets going. But if you're just going to go ahead and have some people on your yard and decide it's going to be your little, quiet settlement, that's fine. So digging is a super big one. People always say, we'll get a shovel, we'll be fine. But sometimes it looks like this, where the huge backhoe is out in the yard. What I recommend is a small rubber track excavator. There's a backfill blade on the front, and they're very small, they're very agile, they can get into tight spaces. People seem to always want to have a burial underneath a tree, but there's a root system under there. And there's a lot of things that happen. So you need to be able to get the backhoe into where you're doing. The nice thing is with the really small earth movers is you can dig 360 degrees. You can move around several places. They have different size buckets for the earth. And it's nice just to be able to make it work, the extended hoe. And this language all makes sense if it's somebody who has a backhoe. Most people in the country who want to do this, they have their John Deere, they have the neighbor with the John Deere. Most don't have to rent it, or most don't have to say to me, hey, can you get a digger? Occasionally they do. In this case, this family said, can you find somebody? And this is John down the street with his backhoe. And he came right over, and I think he charged $300, and he wanted a beer or something. So pretty workable situation out in the country. So digging a grave by yourself, it's really, really hard work. And I know we see those images on the movies or television where people are singing and humming and doing their thing, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy because you're moving pounds of dirt. So I would say, depending on the soil, of course, 2 people that are digging at a pretty good clip, it's probably going to take about 3 hours to dig a 4-foot deep grave. Now, there are people who are very agile, who can dig and dig and dig, and, grave diggers, people who do this for a living can actually make this happen. But the average, Johnny and Joey from the neighborhood are going to come in. They're going to be talking. They're going to be stopping, taking a breath. They're going to be talking about, wow, this is harder than we thought. And you're probably looking at a lot longer time than you thought. So in order to dig, you only need to go about 3 feet, 4 feet down. We found that's where the natural goodness is of putting the body. That's how it works for green burial. Measure the coffin, measure the container. There's no reason to go huge if someone's 100 pounds and they're just wrapped in a sheet, right? Make it simple, measure once, cut twice. No, measure twice, cut once, and just make it happen easy for yourself. That's a great way to do it. We're not worrying about a concrete liner like a standard cemetery. We don't have to make it beautiful. We just need to be able to make the space that the person can go ahead and get in there. And some words of the wise, if you're using a shovel, a long-handed steel shovel works the best. The long handle is to minimize your back pain from your standing and all of that. And just like sweeping, I've learned sweeping, you don't bend, you stand straight, save your back, and it works. Also, sometimes a square model of a shovel is needed because there is dirt and rocks, and ground isn't sort of sandy. You really don't find beautiful, light, fluffy soil. Sometimes you do. Most times you get into clay, you get into rock. You might even need some sort of a jackhammer if it's complete rock tundra under there. You kind of never know what you're getting into. Okay, moving on here. So this is a grave that's been dug, and the side has just been cut right down the side. And if you look in that, that's amazing juxtaposition. I don't think people actually get to witness this, the living microbes of the soil of their loved one's grave. I mean, that pattern, that is so beautiful. And that's the nature world. That's what exists in the complex balance. And it's those soil microbes known as soil food. It's a soil food web, and everything works together. And those microorganisms, they are responsible for that nutrient release from the organic matter. And it's pretty amazing to see that. When you go to a standard cemetery, you tend to not, because there'll be a grave box in the way, or maybe there'll be a lowering device. But this is just land that's been cut, soil has been moved, a shroud is laying down, and that is pretty fantastic. Normally, after someone is placed into the space, there is some sort of a ceremony. Sometimes a loved one is put on one of those lowering devices with the wood like you saw before. Other times a loved one is brought to the space and they are set right next to the grave. Other times there is somebody in the grave willing to take them and lower them into the space, into the loving embrace of the earth. It just depends on how families want to do this. Many ways to do this. We have a ceremony. People go ahead, and a lot of times in these cases, everyone feels the need to get a shovel to replace the earth, be part of the dirt. Some people use their hands, and it's easier to fill the grave than it is to dig the grave. But it's just nice to see the participation. I see a lot of children get involved, and people stay and linger and talk, and pretty soon music goes on and conversation goes on. And something about the family having this in their yard where there's no right or there is no wrong. They can sit there as long as they want. They can hang out. People can wander off and get some food and come back. It's pretty fantastic how that always works out. I always encourage somebody to have a photographer assigned. And nowadays, you don't have to pay for someone with a nice camera. It's merely somebody who just feels comfortable with their phone. They can move around and take really intrusive, non-intrusive pictures while they snap. And I like it to be kind of a safe space where an announcement can be made. Rowan is going to be snapping some pictures to memorialize the event. If you notice that he's facing your direction, you don't care to be in a photo, make a gesture, nod at him, raise your hand, do something. And then Rowan can just kind of pass you by because you just don't want your image captured. And there's times when families say, oh, no problem. I really don't want to be on social media, but yeah, I understand that the immediate family might want to look back at this and they might want to have a record someday of their loved one and what they did to honor their loved one. It happens a lot. And I think it's really neat if someone actually stops because the immediate family is pretty busy mourning, grieving, talking, hugging, talking to people they haven't seen in a while, maybe worrying about, oh, somebody has to go and, unload the lasagna from the stove, whatever it is. If somebody can help out, that's really, really helpful. One reason I really love burial in private land and home burial is I get to be very intimate with the family. I'm in their house a lot. I am holding their hand through this process. I get to handle their loved one. I'm using the alternative burial container that they've come up with, and it's really a step-by-step process. And this family, they made their own natural pine casket. And then they were working with different natural substances to stain the casket. And it was a rainy Saturday. And they phoned me probably every hour on the hour to share what they were trying and then tell me the results. And they were snapping pictures. And I loved every second of it. I loved that the mortician wasn't this person who is taking their loved one away, but the person who's helping them be a part of it. So it was really fun. And so this turned out that their victory was ground coffee. So they were able to rub ground coffee on, and they told me, share this picture, give this to people or send it to people because they wanted people to know that natural stains can be made from black tea and turmeric and coffee and beets and all these things we don't think about. We just think about, shellac it, one and done. But they spent some time, they found out what worked, what actually looked even, and they were really excited about it. So that was really neat. And this was another family who had me into their house, and we were standing around the table, and they weren't quite sure, should they dress mom? Should they have a picture of mom? What should they wrap mom in? All of these suggestions. And then it clicked that mama had her whole life in the kitchen, and all the daughters and granddaughters and everybody hung out in the kitchen. And so they realized that the gingham tablecloth was perfect. And they said, take this. So what you're looking at is she is wrapped in the gingham tablecloth, and all these fresh vegetables from her yard and her harvest are there. Some probably are store-bought too, but nonetheless, it's baskets of vegetables they had. They said her table always had earthenware full of colorful country vegetables from her garden and from the farmer's market. And they thought that idea of wrapping her in the tablecloth and garnish her with this like legume bouquet would be just so fitting. And it was just so perfect. And they did this all while they were listening to the elegant strains of Nina Simone. And it was just so neat to see the family's eyes light up and their hearts full of love because they did exactly what they wanted to do for their person. Pretty neat stuff. My first green burial was 18 years ago. And I love to tell the story because this is what started me on the path of giving green burials to families in their backyard. So the first home burial, I was out here. I was had just come out to Cornerstone and Boring. I'd always worked for corporations. I had just come out to this little tiny parlor, and I got this phone call. And this gentle, lovely community, they asked me to meet them at a local pub because they wanted to discuss funeral arrangements for a friend's green burial. And I had never met family at a pub before. I worked for corporations. We didn't do that. And I thought, well, okay, went down the street and met them at a pub, and they talked about Wanda the Wanderer. They live in an intentional community. They wanted to keep her there, and they wanted to bury her there. And can they do that? And at that point, didn't know much about it. I was fascinated. I read a lot about different cultures, but I have to admit, I don't know a lot at that point. So I talked to the family and I said, you know what? I've never done this before, but I want to help you do this. So if you have patience with me, let's work together. Let's figure it out. And these people were so fantastic. They were so helpful. They started making phone calls and we made it work. So by the next morning, we had a backhoe come and it was digging the grave. And by that afternoon, we were having this amazing burial ceremony. There were people that were speaking of Wanda's kindness, and they were chanting and playing drums. And we were all around her grave, holding hands. And it was just this Kumbaya Love Fest. And I thought, wow, this is just amazing to be a part of this. Her tiny little frame, it was cloaked by this little quilt that she had made as a teenager, and her three sons lowered her into the ground. And it was beautiful. There were some intentions that were put in a bowl and lit on fire. Her sons filled the space. We had eat fish that was caught down the hill at the Clackamas River by her kids, and it was so neat. And as I drove home that day, it was that big aha moment. I thought the reason that I was in the death industry is because I had so much loss as a young person, but I kind of realized, wow, maybe I'm here to provide these experiences to families because I want to do it. I'm willing to do it. And I'm just new to this parlor and boring. And maybe I can just be that weird, wacky gal that helps people get this stuff. So here we are, and this experience changed my life. And 18 years later, those tribe of friends still drop vegetables off at the funeral home, and we give big warm hugs when we see each other at the local market, and it's pretty fun. Pretty fun. It's just very warm. This was another burial that wasn't too long ago, but this is for a totally fun fella. He enjoyed whoopee cushions and short sheeting the beds, and he was this really rare individual who confessed to actually liking clowns, and that's something you don't hear very often. So the rain came, and this tarp, it quickly came out of a truck bed, because everybody sort of makes it up as they go when you're doing a burial that's not sort of regulated and regimented. And the family laughed, even though we were in the rain. It didn't turn out how they thought. They thought it was so hysterical because they felt like this tarp resembled a circus tent. And they thought, as a kid, he would always try to make a circus in the backyard. They thought it was hysterical. It was fun. Made me happy. We don't have too much more, just so you know. Just want to go through a couple more things. Outside the funeral parlor, we have these wonderful banana plant trees. And these are fibrous leaves. And they're excellent for shrouding bodies. So they're exotic as they look, but if you look at them, they're big, they're folded in half, they're huge. If you open one of those up, that's a lot of material. And you can actually take something like that growing in your yard and wrap your loved one. Can you imagine that? Just minding its own business, growing outside a funeral home. And people have these things here in Oregon, a very non-tropical place, and you can use these things. And that's why people come up with bamboo. We have a lot of bamboo, and people come up with really neat ideas. Why not craft something and make it happen? This is an EcoPod. This family, this is another one of these stories where the family wanted something very unique to the person. This is an EcoPod. It's 100% recycled newspaper. It's painted to resemble the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. And I was a little bit nervous when the family shared their plans. They said, oh, we want to go out to our property, and there's a bathtub that he put on the very edge of the viewpoint overlooking the Sandy River. And he wants us to dig, and he wants us to be there. And I thought, okay. I said, not to rain on your parade, but here's the thing. With the lightest tremor, shake of the earth, there's a really good chance that cliff is going to not be there, and that will lodge the grave free, and he probably won't necessarily. And I was kind of going into this, and they just said, yes, that's exactly it. It's a yellow submarine. We want, when it all goes to hell and the big one comes, we want that ground to rumble, and he's going to go down, down the embankment, down the river, and he's going to be in his yellow submarine. And I thought, okay, great. That's great. They explain their vision. It's ethical. It's legal. Okay. Now, of course, we were near a waterway because there's a river, but the river was like 100 feet down. So it wasn't going to affect the river and the cliff and all that. But, as a funeral director, gotta say, let's look at it from this point of view. That is a scenic view, and they said, all right, exactly what he wanted. Okay, so occasionally things don't always turn out right. I'd be remiss if I wasn't honest about the home burial that didn't work out well. That was sure a bummer. So this family obviously had lots of personality. They decided that they wanted to have the burial out by the fire pit. You see the recliner there with the skeleton, and the skeleton's wearing the hat of the person who died. And they said, yeah, we want to do this by the pit. We want to make this. This is what we want to do. Okay, so I said, well, let me come out to the house. Let me at least look at where I need to bring the vehicle down to. let's look at all of this. Oh, no, 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 we got it. And so I kept pushing, saying, well, let me just, no, 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 honey, sweetie, we know what we're doing. So the group of guys knew what they were doing. I thought, let's hope they do. Turned out we had some issues here. So, well, the weather held out, which was good. That's one that sometimes doesn't hold out. The ground wasn't frozen, so that was okay. Water didn't fill the grave space with massive rain. Sometimes people dig these way too early and we get lots of rain or we get lots of snow that melts. That didn't happen. But the issue was we weren't able to. I backed my van down this driveway. I don't have four-wheel drive in a country funeral home van. I could drive it down as far as I could. And then I have a church truck, which is an accordion folding apparatus with wheels. And I actually have these sort of industrial wheels, but not industrial enough to get through the really soft pebbles and soil. So we sunk right away. All right. Sunk. Guys thought they'd carry him. Different guys jumped in and thought they'd carry him. And then we got around to this area, and then they were pretty tired. If you look in the bottom right, you can see that there is some stonework. This isn't flat. We have to go up it's like a 2-foot embankment to get to where we need to go. They were not ready for that at all. So we've already, that you can see that soft soil. We already fell into the soil. We already sunk. My wheels were sunk at that point. And they said, okay, we've got to do something else. So they decided if the day was still nice enough, they were able to get somebody out to come and bring their heavy equipment. They had like a little backhoe. They were able to figure out something about the bucket and a piece of plywood and let's make this work. And then they were able to have enough people who just made it work. But yeah, these guys weren't looking at carrying. And by the way, I didn't mention the person was in a cardboard box. So it was really floppy and really hard. There was no handles. There was all these issues. And I would have never said no to a cardboard box. But what I would have said to them if I came out is, let's lay down some plywood so we can get there from here. Let's have him transfer from my vehicle up on the road to a 4-wheel drive truck to get him down to where there's all these things we could have done to make it easier. And, it wasn't the I told you so. It was just they learned from it. I learned from it. And it really made me strong in my resolve. If I'm helping a family and they want to do a home burial, I now am able to say we had one that didn't quite go according to plan. Please let me work and look because I don't want to make this unfortunate for you. The second piece is this. This is really nice. The grave is really gorgeous, right? There's saffron and yellow flowers lining the bottom. But if you can't really see from this picture, but this grave is really, really deep. Okay, this is like 10 feet deep. Way too deep. Not only is the body really not going to biodegrade and do anything for the planet or nourish that space, but man, they told me we've been up for 2 days to get this grave. I know you only had to go 1/3 of the depth, and then you probably can't see, but it's really, really wide. All right. So the straps they had some rope. But to cross the grave, finally get him into this, have everybody hold it, get him down there. The ropes didn't carry the body to get down to the bottom because people were standing so far away from each other. The grave went so far down between the depth and the width, they sort of had to drop him. And it's not what they wanted to do. Of course, they made some jokes and it was fine. But I mean, it's not, the sister and other people, they're always going to remember that. So I just wish it was different for this family. On the drive home, I cried the whole way. And I just felt so bad for them. I felt like, oh, the man who passed away and the family, they just deserved better. So it was a tough learning experience for all of us. But nonetheless, married. The family occasionally sees me out and yells, "Hey, Undertaker lady, Green Reaper." So, it's all fine, but I just wish that was different for them. Okay, so I'm going to end here. I just love this photo. This is actually Herland Forest in Waukeikis, Washington. This is a natural burial cemetery across the river from where I am in Oregon. And I just love this because after the person was buried, this is boughs from a cedar tree, and these are pine cones. And this cemetery takes the time to finish the grave and not just put the earth back, but finish the grave and snap a picture and send it to the family. I mean, how heartwarming is that? That is amazing to me. And I just have to say that I love home burial because it makes people's eyes sparkle. It's like the last act that they can do on earth. It contributes to this really positive purpose. And I just found that people who've laid their loved ones to rest in this setting, they have found comfort in knowing that their body will return to earth as that circle of life continues. So that's that idea of just going, which I think is really miraculous, really fantastic. I'm going to stop the sharing, put my face back here, and there we are. And the sun's come out. All right. So I think there's questions in the chat, and Winks, if you can read those, that would be great.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for such a lovely presentation.
You're welcome.
So there was one question, which might have been answered in the chat, about how deep do you need to go, how deep do you actually need to dig the grave in Oregon? I know you mentioned that that sweet spot was in 3 to 4 feet. Is there like an actual legal requirement for depth?
Yes, how it reads is we want to have 18 inches of topsoil once the grave has been covered. And 18 inches is pretty close to the top, but we've learned that animals don't tend to do much because they're opportunists. And are you really going to want to do that when there's probably enough rabbits hanging around? So I like to go a little bit more than the 18 inches, but you know, whatever a family wants to do is fine.
Fantastic. And then Nancy, did you have your hand raised a second ago? We can go ahead and jump to you if you have a question. Oh, and you are on mute, I think.
I was just clapping. That was the clapping hand.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Nancy.
So the next question in the chat, and I think this is the last question in chat, but feel free everyone to pop new ones in. How could someone get into this type of work? And that's from Daniela.
So what I tell people often is, if you are going, it depends how you're doing it. If you're going to be an end of life doula, that is one option. If you are going to be a funeral director, that's another option. You can be a celebrant, but really if you're going to be in charge of burying people in their yards, probably being a funeral director would be the closest way to be able to do that. You can help in your community, but people aren't going to be able to necessarily find you. And end of life doulas is not really the wheelhouse of what they do. But it is a way to get to know people. And actually my battery is going to die, so I'm going to quickly just shut my, so you don't have to watch me walk across the parlor here, but I'm going to go plug into the office in the other room. So keep going. I can hear you.
All right.
Well, the next question is, oh, I'm sorry. Somebody got a question? Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
Well, that's okay. It's not a question. I was just going to say I'm a funeral director in Florida and I do natural burials here as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really love the presentation though. That was beautiful. I appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you very much. Gosh,
and I will be doing a backyard burial pretty soon. As soon as the wife decides when we're going to have it. But so I'm kind of on hold, but her husband's in the cooler where I'm working. So
I'm so glad you came to watch this. And yes, go to the house, check out the soil. I mean,
right.
I don't want to assume, oh, it's Florida, it's all beachy, but you know, it's all.
No, it's not all beachy here. Oh no, she said her neighbor's coming over with his tractor. They're gonna dig the hole with a tractor.
Okay, so you've got some support there. Yeah, the shovels, I don't really think the shovel is the best way unless the family truly wants to do it. Some people really want to do it in unison and like maybe do it as a meditation. And
right.
there's a spiritual reason, or they really think, no, I want to do this for dad. I want to sweat it out. I want to do whatever. But I think, yes, but I'm glad. That's a great question. And feel free to reach me at some point if you have any questions about anything.
I will, definitely. Thank
Happy
you.
to help. Welcome.
Okay, and I see Judith, you have your hand. One note here from the chat before we jump to you is in line with this last question, and is asking, Elizabeth, I feel like I have a million questions as someone who is trying to get into the green burial business. Is there a good way to contact you if you're open to answering questions?
Oh yeah, totally. You can call me at the parlor in Boring, Oregon at any time. That's probably the best way, because that way we can have a conversation. If we're emailing, then it's kind of back and forth with questions. But if somebody is looking for funerary stuff, what I always tell them, and I stand by this, start at the corporation level. I think I look back on I'm thrilled with what I do now, but 33 years ago when I started with corporations and had to deal with learning all across the board and be micromanaged and have to do all the aspects of the job, I'm so thankful I had all that experience. So it really made me not only appreciate what I do, but I think it was excellent, excellent. And I also met my husband. He lived in a funeral home and we met at a funeral. So it all worked out good.
I have a quick question. Is is there a regulation about any markings? Not like a tombstone, but like any kind of marking?
There isn't. There isn't. In cemeteries, if you don't have a headstone, there's a GPS coordinate or there is a kind of a metal plug which will have the name
Yeah.
on it. No, if you're doing this in private land, like I said before, you can pour concrete, you can have an obelisk, you can do what the heck you want to do. So there really isn't. You just have to, again, make it known, permit, and then if you sell, you have to let people know. So that's the thing where people say, oh, I really don't like that because it's not regulated. What if somebody comes along and wants to develop it? What if someone doesn't disclose? And you're right, all those things that are there. It's the same with cremating. Sometimes people don't know mom or dad had a pacemaker. Sometimes we don't feel it. And there's radioactivity going out in the universe. So we all do the best we can. We just think trying to be honest, trying to be ethical, legal. But yeah, sometimes people are gonna kind of cut corners and it's not gonna be the greatest.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, and Judith has their hand up.
Great. Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. I had a question about when families sell their house. And have you ever heard that there have been regrets about burying someone on the land? And, how does all of that work then? They move away and then are they then able to visit the person that they buried? I mean, it seems like it could get kind of complicated after the fact, really.
Yeah, Judith, that's a great question. I've not found it to be an issue for families who have moved or who have bought property. I've had people occasionally buy something and they'll say, oh, hi, the realtor told me it's disclosed here and you were the funeral home. And what do we do? Do we need to do anything? And no, you just need to, I don't know. I mean, shout out to the family occasionally. Just, it'd be nice, like for instance, if there was a burial in a yard and somebody was just aware of the person. Wouldn't that be neat if you knew their name was buried there and you could just sort of incorporate them in your life? But what I have found, the question that you asked, which is the painful part of it, is you don't have an easement, you don't have a right. So let's say it's a big acreage, you buried somebody, there's a back gate and you can toddle through the back gate and you can go see your dad and sit with him. You legally don't have the right to do that. You don't own the property. Probably the best way to do that is if you are going to sell it, talk to the owner and say, I did bury my daughter here and on her birthday, would you be opposed to me just kind of quietly coming through the gate or letting you know? And that'd be the best way to handle that. But there have been families who, and especially it's been family, the farm was transferred to another part of the family who said, we don't want you here. You can't be a part of this. And that's heartbreaking because you bury somebody with the intentions that that's going to be your person, but you have to be really okay with letting them go back to nature, letting them go green, and knowing that you've chose not to have a traditional cemetery. The gate might not always be open. The grave might not always be there. Somebody can disinter you if they really want to. There's legal processes for that. Somebody can pour a pad and have a swimming pool. I mean, they can do whatever they want to do. They can decide to build the basketball court over there because it's just too weird that there's a headstone. So if that's going to bother you, if that's the possibility, then definitely rethink it.
I'm not seeing any other questions in chat, but if anyone else has anything that they'd like to ask or discuss, please feel free to raise your hand or just shout it out.
And I'll also tell.
I was just going to say, it's so awesome and empowering for families to participate in taking care of their own. And people don't know how good it feels until they've done it, Just I've witnessed, like one time we had a 12-year-old boy that just buried his dad and he did all the shoveling himself. Here in Florida, at Prairie Creek, we dig by hand. And they get volunteers to come and dig with shovels, and sometimes the family does the digging, but a lot of times the family will participate in covering up. And this 12-year-old kid, I tell you, he's my new hero. You know, he just insisted on doing it himself. He would break down and sob, but he would get back to shoveling. And he did like 90% of the shoveling by himself. And his mother said, wow, like it totally healed this kid from a lot of the grief. You know, it just transformed the energy so big. So it's a very magical thing to do hands-on natural burials, involve the families as much as they're comfortable with. And they get to be part of taking care of their person. And it's a very healing thing, but it's hard to explain that to somebody until they do it. And then they go, oh my God, yeah, I know what you were talking about. So it's cool.
Thank you for explaining that. And I think it's also good for families to know that they have a backup plan, meaning if they
Right.
are at your place and they do start to excavate and they realize, ooh, I'm tired, or oh gosh, I can't, then someone else can take over and do it. Just like
Right.
when people want to have a home funeral, I tell them, okay, keep your loved one at home, but know that my phone works 24 hours a day. So all of a sudden, if you're so tired from caretaking and you
Mhm.
really just need to not be responsible for somebody for a little bit, and you just want mom to come, we can cool, we can refrigerate, we can bring back tomorrow again. You know,
Right.
it takes the village, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. It really does. Yeah. So anyway, well, thank you for all you do, and thank you to the National Home Funeral Alliance too. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. And if anybody has questions, it's cornerstonefuneral.com. It's the only funeral home in Boring, Oregon. So, and I do get questions sometimes out of the blue years later. Hey, I heard you on something, and how do I, whatever. How much material do I need for a shroud? And so, yeah, with anything, it's fine. All good. Happy to help.
Great. Thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you so much for Elizabeth for speaking on this amazing topic. We're really excited, and we will continue to have monthly webinars. So just keep an eye out on our social media and on our website for updates on the upcoming ones. And yeah, thank you all again for just being an amazing part of this community. So I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.